Well, really cool to see you all after last night. So thank you for coming. So far, during this iPres conference, I've often heard the urge to advocate and to call for a narrative. In our view, this also underlines the importance of rights. For instance, to allow to show our content, so the attention on the reuse of our content has increased. At the same time, rules and models on licensing and privacy have developed. These developments have exposed the complexity and the dynamics of rights. And this has placed new demands on the PREMIS model. The PREMIS committee sat together at the iPres conference in Amsterdam and at the spot created a rights working group. Our goal is to investigate how the PREMIS data model can meet the needs of the community on documenting rights that are so important. Just click, I suppose. Yeah. According to the original definition in PREMIS, the rights entity describes the assertion of the rights basis to perform preservation actions. So where events document what actions have been done on objects during the object life cycle, rights statements confirm that you are allowed to perform these actions. In the data dictionary, the statement consists of a reference to the rights basis and a description of what rights have been granted exactly. The semantic unit of rights granted will come by a few times during this presentation. In the next 10 minutes, I will take you through the use cases each of the members of our working group put forward, and as an addition to our short paper, I'll give a sneak peek on possible solutions. I want to stress that these are only first attempts and meant to help the discussion. Our first use case is about agreements between the repository and an external party. BNF and its producers negotiate on service level agreements, defining, among other things, the storage media type, the transfer mode, the SIP's maximum size, etc. It implies a rights statement that, on one hand, may document a permission to this party, instead of a granted right to the repository, as we are used to. And on the other hand, it may imply also an obligation or duty to the repository itself, instead of a granted right. To give an impression of what this means, I made this drawing. We see the rights statement connected to one or more objects in the middle. We see an agent in a new role, namely contact party. The producer gets permission to transfer with certain clues like how and when. In the data dictionary, perhaps a semantic unit can be defined that supports this idea. Above we see the rights granted entity as we know it now. Underneath, we imagine a semantic unit very similar to the rights granted to express more precise what we need, adding a rule type and using an extension for the clues. This would offer the opportunity to write them in code so that checking against these rules can be automated. Like this ODRL statement. The rule type in this example is permission. This could also be an obligation. Like in this drawing. The same contract may define obligations to the repository, like the obligation of validating the incoming file, and perhaps to be performed by a specific piece of software, here the agent. Related to assigning tasks to software is this example of the so-called 72-year rule. The restriction of access, as described in this NARA case, can probably be defined within the current definitions of PREMIS. But the operational activities are to be assigned to users with a specific role in the system. So I forgot to click. So here again, the NARA case with the 72-year rule. Just take your time to read. And these commitments can be defined in terms of permissions under an embargo under the current model. But we don't have the option to add an agent in the role of a certain group. So that is why this is an addition to the current system, current model. And here we see it in the drawing. So at the left hand you have the agent. That is an organization, which is the rights holder, in this case NARA, of this 72-year rights. And next to it there is another agent, which is a type group, which refers to the group of people or employees that are allowed to perform the actual refreshment or dissemination or whatever operational actions are needed, even though the restriction is still there. So there might be several rights granted. You see them next to each other here, like refreshment as well as dissemination. And we already introduced a new agent role, the SNY. We saw it at the software. We can also use it for a group of people. And the linking agent identifier at the bottom points to an agent that has a new type, like agent type group. A second group of use cases refer to the fact that permissions are not always static. A restriction may be lifted or overruled by another statement. For instance, the copyright restriction by a license at the NISV use case. So the two rights statements are mutually related, and you can see this in this drawing. So above there is the copyright rights statement, and there's also a rights statement that says either a statute or a license that may lift the copyright, perhaps temporarily, perhaps for the rest of the lifetime of the copyright. So the two rights statements are mutually related. One has priority over the other. Another use case of TIP is the same sort of relationship between rights statements. In this case, a change in circumstances may trigger another rights statement to become dominant. So in the drawing again, we have a rights statement which may be a license, and another rights statement, also a license, that may become active under certain condition or trigger. and in that case gets priority over the other right statement. In the dictionary, this relationship between rights statements implies a linking rights semantic unit. The trigger might call for an extension again, like we earlier showed with the rule semantic unit. Finally, we talked a lot about the event of a review of rights and how it relates to a change in the actual rights statement. Particularly, the second NARA use case showed this in practice, where documents are being reviewed with lots of different possible outcomes. We are talking about classified documents for different reasons, for different stakeholders. And multiple review events may take place over time with different outcomes. So far, we suggest that the outcome of a review will be added to the rights statement, documenting dates and restrictions that are fully or partially lifted as an outcome of that review. So this is how this would look like. At the left-hand side, you see the objects and that have been reviewed over time, a first review, a second review, and then at the right statement, over time, you add the outcome of the different events or reviews. In the data dictionary, this would look like this. So over time, you add rights granted. It's a repeatable semantic unit, of course. And every time you change the dates of the restriction according to the outcome of the review. So here I come to a small recap. First, the concept of obligations has been proposed. For example, the obligation of the repository to perform certain preservation actions, or for a contact party, how to act. And secondly, we want to deal with restrictions that accumulate and are dynamic over time. And how can we document the outcome of reviews that have impact on these rights during the time of life? The working group will add the solutions to our paper. We will let you know when they are available via our listserv. It's called the PIC list. Feel free to register via our website, the PREMIS website. It's really easy, and then you can take part in all the feedback or new ideas, questions, and comments. We hope with this set of use cases we have given you concrete ideas that you can reflect on for your own situation or needs. And we are looking forward to your feedback. Thank you.
Thanks, Marjolein. Are there any questions from the audience this morning? Okay, I've got two. Maybe I can jump in before everyone else does. So you mentioned that you're working through the examples and you're doing a paper to present to people who implement PREMIS. Roughly speaking, I'm asking this selfishly because my team wants to implement PREMIS rights in a solution we're building. Roughly speaking, when is this next version going to be ready to use?
Ooh.
You can be very rough.
I was warned to not give a date.
You can give a range of years.
Well, I originally hoped it would be this year. but I have to be careful
Yeah.
because we're all doing this aside our own jobs. So the paper will be this year, this autumn, published, and then it also depends on the discussion that it gets. Are we on the correct track? Are there new ideas coming in, or perhaps people say this is not useful? So, that's dependent.
Okay. Yeah. So thanks. So maybe the team needs to engage in this consultation that you've got coming up soon.
Yeah,
that's
sure.
one way we can do that.
Yes. Yes.
I'm just interested in the audience. How many people use PREMIS or use a product that uses PREMIS? Yeah, so maybe 50% or so. So that's great. Just one more. Well, any questions? One more from me would just be about moving from one version of PREMIS to another. So we implemented either 2.2 or whatever an old version of PREMIS is like. Is there any guidance, or are there any complications from going from one version of PREMIS to another?
Well, we aim only to add new features. So there's no backwards compatibility. There is backwards compatibility, if I say it correctly. It also depends the way you implemented PREMIS, of course, because there are lots of ways to implement it. There's lots of ways to be conformant. You can use PREMIS as a reference model and only use it as a mapping tool. Or it's actually in your system and you can take your data out, conform PREMIS. So that might be also a difference in what the impact is if we present a new version. But I think basically it should always help. It shouldn't make it more complicated.
Great, that's really good to hear. Thanks, Marjolein.
Okay, you're welcome.
Have we got any? Great. Christian? Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a question about qualifiers for right statements. So, for example, if I'm an institution that does software archiving, and the original company who has produced the software goes out of business, so I'm not really sure anymore who has the rights and what's the quality of these right statements. Is there a way to describe that in PREMIS?
That's a really good question because I recognize it from my own practice. We don't always know who the rights holder is, or we are not certain. I wouldn't know exactly how I would put it, other than a note. There is a way to add a note to the right statement, which is free text. So that's at the moment the only way to put it, because you can see it as like a traffic light. It's either red or green, but most of them are orange. Perhaps it would help to add such an attribute. So bring it in. You did, so thank you. Yeah.
Okay, one more.
Thank you. Very nice presentation, Marjolein. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, because you asked for feedback on the white paper, and you showed some use cases. Are you also looking for new use cases, or do you think you have the whole range?
No. We are always on the lookout for new use cases. It's the main question we ask any presentation. Send in your use cases, especially if you think you have something that is not. You cannot really fit in the model, or you have questions how to do it. And remember that PREMIS itself is very agnostic, so you should be able to use it in many many circumstances, but still, it's really interesting to talk about how.
Yeah.
Because often there are many ways to implement it.
Yeah.
Because it's such a loosely defined model.
Yeah. So to everyone here, send in your use cases then.
Please do.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, we've got one more.
Yes, hello. It was interesting to hear about how you have these review events that sort of affect the rights statements. Have you considered combining or linking together rights statements and events in the PREMIS data model?
Yes, we have, and we have had a lot of discussion about it. So far, we weren't quite sure to go that far, because it would add a new, it would have lots of impact on the model to add another relationship between, for instance, events and rights. But we are talking about it, so please join our discussion if you are interested, because we'd love to hear your views.
Okay, so there might be, depending on how we get on with the presentations, there might be a small panel session towards the end. So if anyone else has more questions about PREMIS or anything that we're talking about this morning, then that's an opportunity for you to ask more questions. So let's have a thanks for Marjolein. One final time. Thank you.
Thank you.